Yesterday, we looked at point-in-time recovery, where we can take the entire database back to an earlier point in time. But here's the problem. What if only one application has an issue? Do we really want to roll back the entire database and potentially lose good transactions from other applications? Absolutely not. This is where Tablespace Point-in-Time Recovery comes in. So what exactly is Tablespace Point-in-Time Recovery? Tablespace Point-in-Time Recovery is an RMAN recovery technique used to recover one or more selected tablespace to an earlier point in time. The important word here is selected. We're not taking the whole database backward, but targeting only the tablespace affected by the problem. The rest of the database can continue operating at its current state. This makes Tablespace Point-in-Time Recovery extremely useful when a logical problem is isolated to a particular application or group of database objects. Let's make the difference very clear. With database point-in-time recovery, the recovery scope is the entire database. With tablespace point-in-time recovery, the scope is one or more selected tablespace. So imagine you have 10 applications running inside your database and only one application has a data problem. Database point-in-time recovery could affect all 10 applications. Tablespace point-in-time recovery allows you to focus on affected tablespace. That's why tablespace point-in-time recovery can provide more granular recovery and potential less business disruption. So when would the DBA actually use tablespace point-in-time recovery? One example is an accidental drop table. Another is a wrong delete or update caused by an application job. You could also have an application-specific logical corruption issue. The key idea is simple. The problem is localized. If the problem only affects a particular application and this data is isolated in a recovery tablespace, tablespace point-in-time may be a much better option than recovering the entire database. Let's take a real-world example. Imagine one Oracle database supports 3 applications. Application A is working normally. Application B has a problem. And application C is also working normally. Now, suppose someone accidentally runs a delete statement against application B. If we perform database level point-in-time recovery, we could potentially undo valid transactions that happen in applications A and C. But if application B's data is isolated in its own tablespace, we can target that tablespace with tablespace point-in-time recovery. The goal is simple. Recover B while keeping A and C current. Before you jump into tablespace point-in-time recovery, there are several things you need. First, you need the appropriate recovery configuration and recovery information. You also need valid RMAN backups of the required data file. And you need the archive redo log necessary to recover the tablespace to your target time. You also need enough disk space because tablespace point-in-time recovery can involve an auxiliary recovery environment. Finally, you need to understand the dependencies around your target tablespace. In recovery, having a backup is not enough. You need to know whether that backup can actually get you to the recovery point you want. Now let's talk about one of the most important concepts, tablespace dependency. A tablespace doesn't always operate completely by itself. Objects inside your target tablespace may have a relationship with objects stored somewhere else. For example, you might have tables in one tablespace and related objects or dependency in another. During tablespace point-in-time recovery, this relationship matters. So before performing recovery, the DBA needs to understand what is inside the target tablespace and what dependency exists outside it. Good tablespace design can make targeted recovery much easier. Tablespace point-in-time recovery is primarily intended for user and application data. You don't simply treat critical database infrastructure like an ordinary application tablespace. Components such as sys, sysaux, and certain critical recovery-related structure require broader recovery consideration. So the lesson here is, don't think of tablespace point-in-time recovery as a tool for recovering anything and everything. It is a targeted recovery technique designed for appropriate application data. Understanding what can and cannot be recovered with tablespace point-in-time recovery is part of being a good DBA. So how does the process actually work? First, we identify the target tablespace. Next, we identify the recovery points, usually a time before the unwanted change occurs. RMAN then use an auxiliary environment to perform the recovery. Required backup are restored. Archive redo is applied to move the recovered data forward to our target point. Once the recovery is completed, the recovered tablespace can be brought back into the production database. Now, this is one of the most important concepts in tablespace point-in-time recovery, the auxiliary instance. Think of the auxiliary instance as a temporary recovery workspace. Instead of simply taking your production database backward, RMAN performs the recovery work in a separate environment. The required files are restored there and the necessary redo is applied. This gives Oracle a control environment to reconstruct the tablespace at the required point in time. And that's a major reason tablespace point-in-time recovery can recover a specific tablespace without performing a full database rollback. Let's look at the command conceptually. We can specify the tablespace we want to recover and the point in time we want to recover it to. For example, recover tablespace user until time sysdate -1. The important thing to understand here isn't just memorizing the syntax. We are telling RMAN, take this specific tablespace and recover it to the required point in time. One of the biggest advantages of RMAN is that it coordinates much of this recovery process for us. RMAN handles the recovery workflow and works with the auxiliary environment. It can restore the required files and apply the necessary recovery information. But remember, RMAN automation does not replace DBA knowledge. The DBA needs to determine what went wrong, what tablespace is affected, what recovery point do we need, do we have the required backup and archive redo, and what dependency could affect the recovery. The tool executes the recovery, but the DBA makes the recovery decision. Tablespace point-in-time recovery is powerful, but it isn't magic. Cross-tablespace dependency can complicate the recovery. Foreign key relationship may require additional planning. You also need enough disk space for the recovery environment. And depending on the size of the tablespace and the amount of recovery required, the operation can take time. This is why tablespace design matters. Good database architecture doesn't just improve performance, it can also make recovery easy and much flexible. Here are some best practices for tablespace point-in-time recovery. First, where appropriate, separate application into logical tablespace. Understand your object dependency before an incident happens. Maintain valid RMAN backups. Retain archive redo according to your recovery requirements. And most importantly, test your recovery procedures. Don't wait for a production disaster to discover that your backup or tablespace point-in-time recovery procedure doesn't work. A recovery strategy that has never been tested is only a plan on paper. So why should an Oracle DBA care about tablespace point-in-time recovery? Because it gives you precision. Instead of affecting the entire table, you can focus on the damaged or logical incorrect area. That can mean less unnecessary data loss and less disruption to other applications. It also gives the DBA another recovery option when dealing with localized logical error. And as you progress as an Oracle DBA, understanding recovery at this level becomes extremely important. You are no longer just learning RMAN commands, you are learning how to choose the right recovery strategy. Let's wrap this up. Tablespace point-in-time recovery allows us to recover selected tablespace to an earlier point in time. Unlike database point-in-time recovery, we don't necessarily roll back the entire database. It is especially useful for localized logical errors affecting application data. RMAN uses backups, archive redo, and an auxiliary environment to perform the operation. But tablespace point-in-time recovery requires planning. You need the right backups, the required recovery information, enough storage, and an understanding of the tablespace dependency. So remember this, database point-in-time recovery is a sledgehammer. Tablespace point-in-time recovery is the scalpel. And as a DBA, your job is knowing which one to use, when to use it, and how to recover safely. That is it for today's Oracle DBA lesson. See you in the next.